So I'm delighted to be joined this morning by Burrows and Babita Devi from SKC Games. It's absolutely wonderful to have you here. I'm looking forward to finding out more about what your company does. And I wondered whether you could just give us a bit of an intro. What is SKC Games and what are your main products and services?
So thank you, Tim, for this opportunity. SKC Games Studio started off as a games company in the pandemic. And what happened when we were developing the product, which was even in that, this was a couple of years of pandemic, a few years ago, we were using a lot of AI technologies in the game design. And what happened was we started to develop a non-playable character and see whether we could give that character a life outside of the game. What ended up happening was Asa and the team ended up using a lot of AI technology to actually build a product which today is known as 1956 Individuals. So that's a character that's come out of gameplay and has been designed in the way that games are traditionally designed as well. But 1956 Individuals is AI avatars which are designed to help people to access information in a way that they haven't accessed before. So it's all about customer experience and elevating customer experience.
Fantastic. I'm really looking forward to finding out more about how you've done that. I think one of the things that you mentioned there, which was really interesting, was that sort of emotional connection. And I know that that's kind of a key part of what you're trying to do there. So could you help me understand what you did to kind of build those avatars to have that sort of that emotional connection?
A good example would be the work that we're doing with Bletchley Park on AI Alan Turing. And so a key part of what we do when we do our character creation is how do we maintain the persona of that individual as we create the character. So we've studied Alan Turing in a lot of depth. We've worked with his nephew who wrote his biographies to make sure that all of the information that we're containing in the back end and how that character comes across when a person interacts with it is as accurate as it could possibly be. But also we build in personality. And the personality, perhaps another example would be the work that we're doing with Leeds Castle on AI Queen Eleanor of Castile. And we know from the recordings of her, and there's not much information to go on there, but we do know that she was always in a bit of a rush. So for example, with the AI avatar that we created for her, she's always going to be encouraging people to move along quite quickly. And so persona and emotion is really important. Asa might like to add something to that as well.
Yeah, so when we kind of looking at how these characters are engaging as much as possible, obviously we are trying to understand what they were like in terms of their personality. Now, when we're dealing with characters that are past, we can only do that through the connections that those characters have had. And in the case of Alan Turing, obviously there are people still alive today that know of him and knew him or certainly learned from him through their family members. And then you got characters like Queen Helena where no one is really alive and really knows her. It's just what historians themselves have studied and what they believe to be the case. But as much as possible, we try to bring these characters to people in a way that is how they were.
And that's fascinating. In terms of how you actually are able to then make that character come to life and bring that personality to life, a lot of personality is expressed through the facial features or little mannerisms. So how are you able to understand and sort of recreate those sort of mannerisms and facial features?
It's actually incredibly hard thing to do it historically accurately, because you can only really go by the references that you have, and as much as possible we'll look at as many photos as we can of the subject, and then from there, or if there's any video film of them, we will watch that as well, and it'll be through that we will pick up the nuances that the individuals have when they're talking and speaking and how they work. And in the case with Alan Turing, we've studied a lot of stuff on him, and we are bringing out some features in him that a lot of people aren't aware of because they don't easily see, because they're not looking at the detail in the same way as us. but that's the way you do it. Now, if we're working with somebody who is alive, it's much better and easier to do, obviously, because it's really a case of us spending time with them and talking to them in the way we're talking, as naturally as we can, get them comfortable. And it's at that point we start then picking up those little details that they have.
And is that where you're using AI then in order to create a model that helps to learn those patterns, those sort of facial features, and then be able to kind of put those onto your avatars?
It's actually way more traditional than that, actually. So we actually use a traditional method of studying and building that into the character, and we don't use AI to do that. Our art team just do that quite manually. It's a very time-consuming process, including in terms of the facial positions and movements, depending on what they're saying and how they're saying it and the mood that they're actually in. We use AI to deliver the product, as it were. So we're using AI to identify people. So when they're talking to it, the character knows who they're talking to. If they're going through a journey in a museum, we remember who they are. We'll use AI to do natural language processing. So we won't necessarily lean on the LLM to create the content, but we'll use the LLM to take our content and give us something back in a more human-like way. And then we'll use other AI technology like custom voices, AI voices, and vision analysis as well, so that we can analyze the environment that the 3D character is looking at, so it can detect objects as well. And when you bring all these AI technologies together and use them in that way, it becomes quite a compelling product.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think the piece to add to that as well is that we use it for even things like age detection. So we've developed product that can talk to up to 100 people at a time. And where there are sensitive topics that are being talked about, like, for example, in the case of Alan Turing, with some of the information that, we need to be mindful of whether we're talking to adults or children, our technology is able to detect the youngest person in the audience and talk to that person. So even if there's a group of 15 people, it will recognize that there's a child in the audience.
That's really interesting. I love all the different use cases there, of how you're actually using it for a very practical commercial perspective as well. Can you tell me a little bit more about your ethical approach? And I know in the past we've had conversations about how you're using and you're very committed to the ethical approach of AI. So what does that mean for SKC Games? How are you using AI ethically within what you're doing?
I'll let Asa lead on that one.
Okay, yeah.
Very passionate about ethics.
So obviously, Tim, you know that when you talk about AI ethics, it's a massively huge subject, and it covers lots of pillars and lots of layers. I think really in a more of an overview of where ethics is really important to us as a business is that it's important for us to foster some trust in AI. And that was really the real driving factor for us when we were starting to look at how we want to apply ethics within the way we work and what we do. And there are companies out there, lots of companies that do have ethics. They follow standards. IEEE have created a certification standard for ethics, but that's really a lot around the process of building AI products and technology, and doesn't necessarily do with the direct impact or the social impact, which also should come under AI ethics, certainly in the way we look at it. So typically companies have ethics that are 6 pillars that cover all the common standards of transparency, fairness, security, etc. But we kind of have a 7th pillar that we call economic security. And this is really about rewarding people that allow us to use their data to enhance models or build models that we are then using in our AI products, so that these people can earn continual revenue from the stuff that we're using while that product's in play. But also, as a sort of like you kind of left the field approach to ethics is when you're building these characters or you're building these individuals, you have a human moral obligation to consider other people that will be affected by the character that you're creating. It's another level of ethics altogether. And it's really important that especially when we're dealing with historical characters, that we are understanding who are the right stakeholders and the people that are affected today by the things that we do, and make sure it's really important that companies like us, when we're recreating a story about somebody, and we're doing it in a way that allows people to engage with a virtual version of them, an avatar of them, it is important that the data that we use that sit at the back of that has the blessing, the understanding from the people that are directly connected to it. And that again comes under an area of ethics. I mean, it is such a massive subject. And it needs to be broken down into really sort of some key academic disciplines that people should really be, studying, in universities and stuff. Because as we move forward and AI starts to become more widespread than it is today, I mean, it's certainly getting better, more advanced, it's faster. It's going to have a much bigger impact on society. And what we can't afford to do, I think, is let the AI regulation and ethics around AI to sort of catch up with the explosion of it. It needs to try and get ahead of it, really, and plan for what's coming.
I think the word trust you mentioned at the beginning, and that's a key thing here, isn't it? That where we are at the moment, there is such a big opportunity for businesses like yours to get customers to use your services and tools, but it has to be built upon trust. They have to trust that you are delivering a service and tool which is fair for the people you're involving in that process, but also fair to the characters. And when people trust it, then they're going to buy more. So I think that's actually a very future-looking way of approaching business, is that you need to think about trust from the beginning. Unfortunately, where we are with the whole industry is that there's actually, things are moving so quickly that often one of the things that people aren't thinking about is building that trust. How do we build that trust? Why should we build that trust? And the whole, broadly responsible approach to it.
One of the key things, I think, one of the distinctions in terms of the product that we're developing is, as Asa said earlier, we're using a lot of AI technology, but we're not calling out on the large language models in terms of providing us with answers to questions. So all of our back-end domain knowledge, for example, with Alan Turing, everything in the back end has been vetted by the people that knew him and the people that, so, his nephew was involved, Bletchley Park have been involved. We've called on King's College, which is where he studied, and gone through the archives there. And so that's, I think, a really big part of it as well.
That's fascinating. And I think then I'd love to kind of find out a little bit more about how you ensure that accuracy, because, one of the things that I've seen across different businesses is that there's often, diversity or bias that creeps into the data sets that you put in, and therefore then the results that come out of it are biased, whether that be for diversity inclusion or whether that just be inaccurate. But it sounds like you're actually spending a lot of time, it's a much smaller set because it's just Alan Turing, right? But how do you address the accuracy issue there to ensure that what you're actually getting is properly accurate?
Yeah, I think when you come to work on a project like this, the first thing you need to do is you have to work out who are the correct stakeholders to be involved in the data, basically the content that you're going to put into it. That is the crucial piece that you do at the beginning. Alan Turing is a really good case in point, because there is fact and then there's opinion. And around Alan Turing, there's an awful lot of opinion, right? And it's important that we are engaging with those that are more closer to his work, connected to him in some way, and use that and align ourselves alongside them to get the accurate information that is perceived to be fact. Right? Yeah, people can argue whether it's fact or not. That's people will do that. They can't help themselves, right? But that's what it is. But what we have to do is, when we're pulling this content together, is try to disseminate the facts from the opinion and try to keep the opinion out as much as possible. And that's the way you have to do it. Now, it's sometimes easier when there are many people around that are connected to that person or that historical figure. And it's incredibly hard when it's someone like Queen Eleanor, where there really isn't very much at all. You are now the pendulum swinging across to historical facts and opinion at that point, so it is really about choosing who the right stakeholders are that would come together that make those decisions. And one of the things that we are doing with Bletchley Park is documenting the process, and so and Bletchley doing the same, so that we can then show people how we got to the decision on the facts that we're presenting, and why we chose that particular information. And that's how you have to do it, I think.
I think that's really key. Oh, sorry, I was just going to jump in just to say one quick thing. The transparency, that's what you're talking about there, is the fact you're recording everything. And that's what is often missing in the black box LLMs and foundational models, where there's no transparency. So when you do find an outcome which doesn't seem to make sense, there's nothing to go back to understand how that. But sorry, Babita, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I was going to say, exactly, that's exactly the point. So we are, with everything that we're creating, we're also documenting the making of. And so, because, for example, with Alan Turing, with Queen Eleanor, we're working with the head curator at Leeds Castle. So she's now pulling all of the information, the content together with us. And whatever we end up creating in some ways is going to be gospel. So people will draw on that as the main point of reference going forward, because it's going to be the most comprehensive data set around those individuals. So there's a lot of responsibility that comes with that. And that's why we've decided to document everything through the making of as we build each character as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And when we talk about LLMs, I mean, LLMs are amazing, right? They can really be used in a really good, positive way, but they're absolutely really useless for giving you answers. And this is a factor that's going to get worse. It's not necessarily going to get better, because as the internet's becoming, less moderated, and social media platforms are becoming less moderated, models in the future that are pulling data from them are going to be very much opinion based on a lot of stuff that's not really very factual, and so really, for us, we kind of see large language models being just a great way to say something in a human-like way, but not necessarily wanting to use it to give us the answers that we're looking for. For that comes from our stakeholders, that come from the people that are contributing that information to us.
Interesting. It's fascinating, and I'd love to kind of dive into that more, but I think in the interest of time we might have to move on to another topic. But I can see that almost what you're doing there is getting the information that's been carefully collected and curated in museums and galleries and libraries over hundreds of years by humans, and then you're bringing that to life, that truth and those facts to life in the avatar you're creating. Absolutely fascinating stuff. I wanted to go on just quickly to the future of creativity. Because I think this is, you're really very much at that bleeding edge of creating the future of creativity. What is the main sort of way in which you're now sort of seeing the future? What are the main developments that you're excited about in this space?
So when we talked about ethics earlier, one of the pillars that Asa touched on was economic prosperity, which is a pillar that we've added into the framework that Microsoft uses. And what economic prosperity is about rewarding those artists that are contributing towards the content creation piece. So I think certainly there's a whole area there that's starting to unfold, and clearly there's been a lot of coverage on this. And I think this is one of the big issues in terms of copyright. How do we protect people's, contribution going forward? So that's something that we've already factored into the work that we're doing. So it is very much like a Spotify model. We use someone's voice and they get paid for that every time we're using their voice. And the same is true of how we're building our content. So as we start to work with key stakeholders around content, and as we start to roll out more of those products, especially with some of the more notable figures around the world that can be deployed in many different locations, then we can work with ensuring that the people that have provided us and helped us to curate that content in the first instance are also rewarded then commercially as well. So for us, it's really about leading from the front. We are ahead of the market in terms of where the product is at. We know that already. So our AI avatars are already advanced, but what we want to do is make sure that the back end and the systems and the frameworks and everything that we're creating is also at the cutting edge of what is possible, and making sure that everybody's rewarded fairly.
And I think the way to think about it is you can look at it in two ways. You can do what is so the right thing to do, what is the right human thing to do, and then you can look at it from a business transaction, and they both align when you look at it in good old-fashioned business sense. You do a business arrangement with someone and both have to win. If one person's not winning in the business relationship, then the business relationship will break down. And this is what we have with AI at the moment, where AI cannot be built without a large amount of data, people's data, mostly people from the creative industry's data. And if you have a scenario which is being proposed that generative AI companies can get exemption from copyright law under certain conditions, then you're not necessarily creating that right business transaction. There will be losers, and the people that will lose ultimately will be humans and human creativity, because these amazing people will not share their creativity, not in an open space that they do today. It will become more niche. It will become more closed in and protected. And that would be terrible for humanity, like ongoing, because humanity would not survive off of an AI creative world. No, in my opinion, anyway.
No, and I think you're right. I 100% agree with the way you're looking at this. It's great to hear it in your words, and to know that you're kind of fighting that fight as well and building those foundations. Just to wrap things up there, because unfortunately we're going to have to kind of wrap things up in a minute. I'd love to know about how you see personalization working in this space. In lots of different areas of technology, personalization has been one of the sort of holy grails. And as we start to think about AI, personalization becomes even more, there's even more exciting possibilities. So I'd love to hear your perspective on where you've got to with being able to create personalized solutions.
Oh, the way that we're building our characters and the fact that you can have a natural two-way conversation with them means that the deployment is, it's like, where does your imagination take you? We're having a lot of interest from lots of different sectors at the moment around the fact this personalization piece in particular. And for example, we're talking with shopping malls where they want people to be able to go in and ask very specific questions, and if they're rushing from one place to the next, and how can an avatar help them plan their time, or even organize a taxi for them in a shopping mall, and those sorts of things. As we start to get into the museum and heritage space, which we've touched on a lot today, it's very much about understanding what somebody is interested in, and then ensuring that we can give information to them in the most efficient and effective way possible. And so a good example that ASA often uses is, if you think about places like the Imperial War Museum, for example, and as you walk from one plane to the next, as a visitor, you're interested in something very specific. And so as you ask an avatar about that specific thing, and you go and then look at the next plane, the avatar already knows what you're interested in. So one of the things we do with people's permission is to actually hold their data during visits as well. So as they start to go around, they'll be remembered, but that's for the duration of the visit. So the applications are extensive. Another good use case is, just checking in. We've all checked into hotels and waited in very long queues to be able to check in. But with our avatars, you can scan your passport, you can check in, but then you can continue a conversation when you go up to your room. So rather than having a screen, which is, welcome Tim Flag to, the Hilton Hotel, you can actually have a conversation with avatar, and you can say, okay, well, where's the best Chinese restaurant around here that I could go to with the family, and those sorts of questions. So I think really for us, it's about taking information and making that available to people as and when they need it in the fastest way possible, which traditionally has been very linear unless you're talking to a human person. So this is really about how do we give people access to information in a non-linear way. Asa, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, and actually personalization and data has actually been my background, and I've done a lot of big personalization projects with Xerox and financial services institutions in the early days when people were doing trans promo, which was a nice little marketing buzzword at the time. But in terms of personalization, one of the beauties of AI is it gives us that ability to do it in a non-invasive way. So for example, with the museums, we're personalized it based on the person that we visually can see. We know what they look like, and they're okay with us keeping their data while they're in the museum. And then because of that, that personal interaction becomes more natural. It's not like, oh, can you fill in the form so we can get to know you? You don't have to do that. You can just have a little bit of a conversation, and as you're having conversation, the avatar during that instance or that session that can learn about you, and I think that just makes that personalization feel more subtle and more genuine, and also can actually be really helpful to the user that's engaging in it as well. So
Yeah.
I think the personalization is, from a marketer's perspective, can go insane in terms of what you can do.
Yeah.
But one of the things that really is good, especially with the way AI works in terms of how it searches and pulls data together, is the ability to do it for a group of people together with different likes and different interests, but they're all going away together. So like, take a travel space would be a great one. You're going together on a holiday as a group. You've all got your little interests and likes, and you've spoken to your AI avatar agent about the things you enjoy in that, and now that agent is suggesting things that works for all of you as a group, as opposed to, you're all going to go and swim with the dolphins, but one of you can't swim. So that's obviously not going to be fun for them. So yeah, I just think I think you just can do it on a much more detailed basis, and it's fun. I think I think a lot of industries are going to have a lot of fun at deploying AI in those sort of scenarios.
I think the other piece as well, just on that, Asa, is what we haven't even touched on is, I mean, there's so many things to talk about, but the fact that it's multilingual, and for the first time, those back-end systems that Asa was talking about, then you can actually do analysis regardless of what language somebody's talking in. So, up until now, it's been very much around, if somebody says something in English, then we can collect that information and we can make some judgment calls around that. But now imagine you have all these different, international visitors coming to a location, and what you can actually do with that whole back-end information, and how you can inform the organization around making either certain changes or improving an experience, or what's the main thing that people are asking about. How do we build that into that customer experience?
Yeah, I think there's there's a lot more I'd love to ask you about. We'll have to have you back on the webinar again, maybe in a couple of months. I'd love to explore education. I think there's so many opportunities, just in what you're saying and in the multilingual language side of things. But unfortunately, we're going to have to sort of wrap things up there for today. But it's been incredible to hear about the work that you're doing. I really am looking forward to kind of checking out the virtual Alan Turing and Queen Eleanor. They sound what a unique experience to be able to interact with them, right? I mean, that's just fascinating. And there's been so many things that we've touched upon today, which I think ring very true with what we're trying to do at UKAI, which is build an industry based upon responsibility and an ethical approach. And that's the only way to really sort of build trust with these consumers. And there was a sort of nice sort of virtuous circle you were talking about there at the end, which is, because you've built trust, the consumers might share their data, and then once they share their data, then they can get the personalized services, and it can just build this ongoing sort of virtuous cycle of trust if we get it right, and we're building it upon those responsible ethical foundations. So I'm going to say thank you to both of you for a really fascinating webinar. I really enjoyed that, and it's great to meet you both.
Thank you. Thanks, Tim.
Thanks, Tim.